And yeah, that honestly sounds really interesting, intriguing. You seem to have a very personal connection with today's event, and I'm really glad. I honestly can't wait to see what we have with Dr. Knudsen lined up as well. She seems like an inspiration to all of us, and definitely seems like there's a lot to learn from today's event. Looks like the doctor's here, so I'm just going to pass it over to our host, Madhuri.
Hello, and welcome to MedNews Week Keynote Conference, where our goal is to bring you the most cutting edge information from medicine's global leaders. I am Madhuri Balasubramanian, and I will be your host for today. Before we begin, I want to first acknowledge the great team that helps to make these events a reality. Our founders are two internationally recognized researchers, Doctors Jan Leifman and Chandler Park, who is also the president of Kentucky ASCO. Our chairs include Doctors Park and Leifman. Our associate directors include Muskan Joshi, Gayatri Menon, Helena Kaloma, and myself. Our managers include Alexandra Vanderkieft, William Wilkerson, and Ahmed Aziz. Our educational committee includes Sean Jacobs, Harshal Choria, Harshita, Soumya Nadar, Rabab Hunaid, Imad bin Zahid, Shrivika Kannan, Gabriel Alves, Jana Ghazal, Dr. Disha Mahindran, Viviana Cordiana, and Jade Campbell. We also want to thank our partners, Vimedi, which is a global leader in medical video educational content, and the National Society of High School Scholars, an honor society founded by Klaus Nobel of the Nobel Prize family. The moderator for today's event is Ahmed Aziz. Now, to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Karen Nut- uh, Knudsen. She is a globally recognized leader, researcher, and speaker in oncology. She is also an internationally recognized leader, researcher, speaker in cancer advocacy as well as research innovation. She is currently serving as a chief executive officer at the American Cancer Society and the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. She serves various other leadership roles, including the co leader at the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, where she delivers unique immunotherapies for treatment of mantle cell lymphoma project. She's also a part of the editorial advisory board at the Medicine Matters Oncology. She has held multiple past leadership positions at the New York Presbyterian Hospital. She has been an associate director at many places. She has been an author in over 100 publications, including book chapters, abstracts, peer reviewed articles, and so much more. She is definitely one to know, and she's really passionate and dedicated as a nationally recognized educator. With that, I am really excited to have her here today. The floor is now yours, Doctor.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Really a pleasure to be here. I do just want to just fact correct a couple of quick things because I think my bio probably got crossed with someone else's there toward the end. My expertise is actually in advanced prostate cancer. Before I came to the American Cancer Society, I was a leader in oncology at Jefferson Health and the Sidney Kimmel Cancer Center, where I was the head of the oncology program, both research and care for a very large 16 hospital health system across 2 states. So I know that that kind of thing happens. I just wanted to make sure people knew what I did so they could ask me the right questions. It's really an honor to get a chance to talk to you today about what I've been doing in the last 2.5 years. And that is leading the American Cancer Society. I hope you find this helpful. The American Cancer Society is 110 years old, which is both true and false at the same time. With the American Cancer Society spent its first 100 years as a federated model. So really all doing good things to try to improve the burden of cancer in the United States and beyond in the global effort, but they were truly separate organizations. Up until most recently, 12 separate organizations. So I'm the CEO to lead the strategy to bring it together as one organization. It's what we've been doing now these last almost 3 years. It's been incredible. And so what I was hoping to do is tell you a little bit about the American Cancer Society and what we stand for, what we do, how we do it, with an eye toward inviting commentary, inquiry, and the potential for partnership. So, and I love the goal here at MedNews Week to try to make sure that people are empowered with information, and the right information. And as you will see, that's our goal too. So let me see if I can take it away. Good. Can you see my screen? Perfect. All right. So let's take a journey and talk about the American Cancer Society. So I do, have some disclosures that nothing that is relevant for today's talk. So I thought I could start with where it is that we all come together. The American Cancer Society exists because of something I think we all agree on, and that's that the burden of cancer is unacceptably high. Right now in the United States, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women over their lifetime will receive a cancer diagnosis. And it is unfortunate, and it's even further unfortunate that is such a burden on individuals, because we have so much to do in order to solve for these 200 diseases that are cancer. So our unique strategy and why we exist at the American Cancer Society is just something that we strive to do every day, and that's to improve the lives of cancer patients and their families. And as you'll hear about, the way we do that is through 3 different things that are quite unique to the American Cancer Society: through discovery and including, determining ways to address these 200 different diseases through cancer science, but to bring those discoveries to people through advocacy and through patient support. This is something that happens daily in my world, but it is the case that we have to keep our eye on the prize. What is it that success looks like for us? And that's to end cancer as we know it for everyone. We'll get back to this, but this is what I call the 8 words that define us. So the problem that we're trying to solve is outlined here. And many of you may have seen this silhouette slide every year, or at least I hope you have. This is the result of a very large research project from the American Cancer Society, and that we release every year, that outlines the problem of cancer in the United States. Incidence at the top, mortality at the bottom. So this year, we're anticipating about 1.9 million new diagnoses of cancer in the United States and 600,000 deaths of disease. And what we watch are these trends. We'll get to the how and the why. But what's notable about this ACS Cancer Statistics Report is that it truly is the single book of truth for the United States about trends in cancer. And it is the most frequently cited publication in all of science, not just all of oncology, but all of science, because it is utilized at the start almost of every publication to outlay the problem. So we take our responsibility here very seriously. So what do we stand for? As an organization and a business like any other, we have to determine whom are our key stakeholders. And in our world, it's 2. It's the cancer patient and their family. We love scientists. We fund science. We very much appreciate the need for clinicians and oncology teams, but they are not our key stakeholder. Our key stakeholder is the patient and the family. And so what does that look like, and what does that mean? That means that all of our decision-making has to be centered around how it is that what we do can improve a life. And that is something that we need to be able to measure. A second hallmark of ACS is that we are focused on a platform of ensuring that everyone benefits from cancer science and in striving toward equitable outcomes in cancer care. And so that foundation is built within every program that we do. So every program that we lift up at the American Cancer Society is intended to not only improve a life, but solve for a cancer disparity, which can be profound in our country. And again, I talked about the fact that we do that through 3 ways: discovery, patient support, and advocacy. So what I'd like to do is to dive into what we call these 3 pillars of the American Cancer Society. So let's talk about cancer discovery first and cancer science. And by that, I mean all cancer science, science associated with prevention, with early detection, with treatment, with survivorship, and even bereavement. Because remember, the caregiver is also one of our key stakeholders. So the reason to do science, I think, is really well illustrated in these particular data sets. Again, coming from the American Cancer Society, and we document this and release it to the world every year. So what you're looking at on the left for men and on the right for women are trends in cancer mortality, starting circa the mid-1970s. In the United States, this was an important moment because our then President Nixon started what he calls the war on cancer. So we're celebrating 50 years plus of this war on cancer. It created our National Cancer Institute, which is a major source of funding for cancer science and cancer clinical trials included within that. So population, basic, and clinical science. So what would have happened had we done nothing is what's in red, and that cancer mortality rate would continue to increase. But what actually happened is in blue. So circa 1991, there was this inflection point. And in fact, that was the high watermark for cancer mortality rate in the United States. And what happened circa 1991 was a doubling down of investment in cancer research from both the US government and the American Cancer Society. So what we saw since 1991 is this flattening of the curve, starting off at a 0.5% year-over-year decline, and then a 1%. And last year, we finally achieved a 2% year-over-year decline in cancer mortality. So if you assess what happens in that delta, overall, since 1991, cancer science and breakthroughs have given us an overall 33% decline in cancer mortality, which I think is profound. And in total, that's almost 4 million deaths averted since in that time period from cancer as a result of cancer science. So we very strongly believe that this is not the time to slow down and that we need to continue to fund innovative cancer research, again, in the laboratory, at the population level, and in the clinic. We know that clinical trials and clinical science is the most advanced form of cancer care, at least in the United States. So we ourselves at the American Cancer Society have played a major role in this, and we will continue to play a major role. Since that inflection point in 1991, we've given more than 13,000 individual cancer research grants, totaling more than $3.3 billion. We are the largest funder of cancer research outside the US government in the United States. And this is something that we are very proud of, yet also our intent to increase over time. So let's talk about how that happens. I said discovery or cancer science is one of our major pillars. So within that, there are two major areas that go underneath my chief science officer, Bill Dayhood, who's just truly exceptional. The intramural programs, so the scientists that are part of us at the American Cancer Society and that are, that we employ and that are part of our science team. And then the extramural program where we fund cancer science across the country. So let's pick that apart a little bit. So in the intramural program, we really focus in two areas, population science and epidemiology. You've already heard about some of the epidemiology, this cancer statistics report that every year is this incredible research study where we look at all trends, cancer incidence, cancer mortality by demographic, by geographic. And we also assess what could be driving some of the changes that we see in prevention, as attributed to changes in prevention, changes in screening, changes in cancer treatment and availability of treatment. And the United States is a very large geography. So the rate at which advances hit rural areas can be quite delayed compared to where advances hit into urban areas or areas near a major cancer center. And so it's part of our obligation in this research study to root out those cancer disparities, those differences where things are happening across the country, and try to determine or set hypotheses of what could actually be underpinning it. It's a really important component of what we do. Now, the population science team within the American Cancer Society has another important role worth mention, and that's running cohort studies. So cohort studies in the cancer world are where we enroll healthy individuals and then follow them voluntarily over their lifetime, taking tissue, DNA samples, and then asking them to keep us up to date with their health history, their exposure history, their family history, their genetics, if they know it. And so it's these kinds of studies that are incredibly expensive and quite an investment because you're following people over decades, over their lifetime. It's these kinds of studies that help us understand cancer risk. It's these kinds of studies, in fact, it was the American Cancer Society study that first linked definitively smoking to lung cancer. So this is something that we would like to continue to expand, and we are expanding this. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But our current cohort, I just want to call out, it's called CPS3, Cancer Prevention Study 3, that has more than 306,000 people enrolled in this study, and we've been following over their lifetime. And the kinds of things that we now know about these individuals, we've continued to expand, now looking at things like their microbiome, whether or not they were exposed to COVID, whether or not they're engaged in a physical activity program, et cetera. So this is a point of potential collaboration. So if someone would like to collaborate with the American Cancer Society in this very detailed resource, we'd love those ideas, because these are the kinds of studies that will help us determine cancer risk and also the potential for early detection, because of course, many individuals of these 306,000 over their lifetime are going to develop cancer. Back to what I said at the beginning, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women over their lifetime. Many of them have developed cancer during the cohort study. And this is how we will learn more about cancer risk. So the third thing that actually happens within our discovery team, the intramural team, the team that we employ, our scientists group, are cancer screening guidelines. These are by definition guidelines developed based on science, based on a 3-year intensive study of recommendations for individuals of average risk. So someone without a known genetic risk, someone without a known familial risk. For the average risk population, what should the screening guideline look like based on best available evidence? And in the United States, this is incredibly important because it sets policy for how it is that health insurance will reimburse or not for cancer screening. So a real-time update for you is something that we released about 3 weeks ago, and it's our new lung cancer screening guidelines. So it's the case that these new guidelines are expected to expand significantly the number of people who are now eligible for lung cancer screening. This is key. Lung cancer is the #1 leading cause of cancer death in the United States for both men and women. So what does the updated screening guideline look like? It took the start age from 55 down to 50 and ending from 75 to 80. So there's an age range expansion because the science told us that it was still important to screen someone post 75 and that 55 was too late. Starting at 50 had to be what we needed to do. Previous guidelines also required somebody had to have a 30-pack year history, which is a very significant, heavy smoking history. The science now told us we can reduce that to a 20-pack history. So this is a pack year history. So this means that more people are eligible for being screened. And it's also the case that previous guidelines said that if you had quit 15 years in a day after, once you had quit 15 years in one day, you were no longer eligible for screening versus someone who had quit 14 years ago instead of 15 years. So there was somewhat of an arbitrary cutoff. Elevation of that and examination through the science told us that it didn't matter. It doesn't matter when you quit. It's still important to be screened based on the data. So that was actually eliminated from the guideline. So we expect that these changes to the guidelines will create millions of more opportunities for individuals to be screened for lung cancer in a way that could be life-saving. This is a very important component of what it is that we do within our own science teams. So that's our own science teams. But what about the extramural program? This is where we fund science across the country, not scientists we employ, but scientists at major medical schools, at undergraduate institutions, at health systems, running clinical trials. So we fund across the cancer continuum, everything, again, from prevention all the way to treatment and bereavement. So what does that look like? This is just an example on the left. The little pins are just where we had grants in the last year. And on the right, the pie chart is just meant to tell you that we truly fund across the cancer continuum, different cancer types. For us, we're not focused on a specific tissue type of cancer. For us, that seems like old thinking. We know that triple negative breast cancer has high similarity to things that are true in ovarian cancer, maybe even much so than other types of breast cancer. So really important to understand the biology of disease in modern terms means that we should be funding the best and brightest science and the kind of science that has an opportunity to improve a life. So we also fund across the career state. This is an important thing for us. So we do fund postdoctoral fellows. Prior to ACS being one organization, there had been a restriction on funding a postdoctoral fellow or a fellow of any kind who was not a US citizen. So we eliminated that requirement. Didn't make any sense to me as a CEO. And we've also increased the eligibility criteria in terms of length of time someone can be from their terminal degree, as well as the overall compensation for those individuals. Same for the full professors on that side. We've expanded eligibility there. And we've also announced a number of different types of grants that are very forward thinking. For example, our AHEAD grants. AHEAD grants are for advancing health equity and addressing disparities. And what those grants are focused on is getting healthcare closer to home. Things like wearables, things like chemotherapy at home, things like, can we develop interventions that will allow someone to receive their therapy closer to their community, even if not in the home. So we're very excited about just the breadth of science that we're able to fund now. So as excited as we are about science, and we can ascribe, as I said in those beginning graphs, the scientific discovery to cancer mortality reduction, the other two components of ACS have to address these data. So what you're looking at here are cancer mortality rates for Black individuals in the United States, represented on the red line, and white individuals in the United States, represented by the gray line. Men on the left, women on the right, all cancers on the top, prostate and breast cancer on the bottom. And what you see is disheartening. I know I am not satisfied. This is a durable, sustained disparity in outcome based on someone's race or ethnicity in the United States. And it is all too common of an observation. We simply must stop talking about it and try to develop intervention strategies that solve for these known cancer disparities. This is just one kind of cancer disparity. We know we have disparities in geography, we have disparities in age, we have disparities in gender, and there have been many studies, including those funded by us, to try to understand what drives these cancer disparities. And the list is relatively straightforward, yet difficult to overcome as it comes to solutions. Things like lack of transportation. As a former healthcare executive myself, I can tell you that 16% of our patients in my former health system could not make it to care 5 days a week if you're under chemotherapy or radiation therapy. And we know if someone can only come to chemotherapy 3 days a week instead of 5, they're not going to have the same outcome as someone who completes their care as planned. So lack of transportation is a basic blocking and tackling of getting these breakthroughs to people and getting access to quality cancer care that we have to solve for in the US. Same for lack of housing. Some people travel long distances or can travel across an entire state without finding a major cancer center. That's an issue. Gaps in digital literacy, gaps in health literacy, misinformation, which I know you're trying to solve for. Financial toxicity is a reality in the United States. Upwards of 42% of people expend the entirety of their life savings when they have a cancer diagnosis in order to pay for care. Lack of access to health insurance, as well as just provider and health system unconscious bias, all contributed to the kinds of disparities that you see on this page. So the other two components of ACS are committed to doing something about that. And this is where I wanted to get back to what I called those 8 words that define us, ending cancer as we know it for everyone. That's what success looks like. But what I always say to my team is these 8 words define us, but not all words are created equal. The thing that distinguishes the American Cancer Society is that it's for everyone. And that if we're doing things right, then the kinds of disparities that you saw on the other page will not continue in the United States. So what do we do? So lots of programs that are embedded throughout everything we do, but a new one that I wanted to call out, they're called Health Equity Ambassadors. We have a vast geography in the United States. And what doesn't work is when someone just parachutes into a community and says, that's figuratively, not literally, parachutes into a community and says, you should get screened, you should undertake this activity for cancer prevention, but they're not from that community. So they're not heard. And so what we launched at the beginning of this year underneath our Chief Diversity Officer, who's an amazing human being, is something called Health Equity Ambassadors. And we train them. These are people who are not employed by the American Cancer Society, but they are key stakeholders of a community. Maybe they work for the mayor. Maybe they are the mayor. Maybe they run the Boys and Girls Club, or they run the gym. Maybe they run a barber shop or a beauty salon, trusted members of a community. And we educate them about the cancer-specific problems in that area. For example, if there's a heavy smoking population, we would take that health equity ambassador and train them to talk about, in layman's terms, cancer prevention, cancer screening, the fact that lung cancer is not a death sentence, but it is critical to catch cancer early, therefore screening is essential. Or to talk about HPV vaccination, because we really can end cervical cancer if HPV vaccination is taken up as suggested. So this Health Equity Ambassador program has become a really important one for us. I think it's one that can be emulated, and certainly we can learn from others doing similar types of programs. But just this year alone, we've trained more than 2,400 health equity ambassadors around the country, and are feeling really excited about the fact that they've already been able to connect with more than 550,000 people with the news about cancer prevention and screening and early detection. So, but let's talk about those other two pillars in a little bit more depth. Advocacy. This is a really incredible arm of the American Cancer Society. So I'm going to use some American speak for a second, and it's called a 501c4. So a 501c3 in the United States is a charitable organization, like a not-for-profit hospital or a university is a 501c3. So you don't have to pay taxes. You have a charitable mission, but what you can't do is influence elected officials or attempt to influence elected officials through persuasion or through a newspaper ad. With a 501c4, you can, and that's my advocacy arm. So it is a little bit separate than the American Cancer Society. It's the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network that you heard about at the beginning, and I am the CEO of both. So advocacy is how we change millions of lives in one day. We work at the federal level, meaning the US government level. But many healthcare decisions are also made in the United States at the state level. So we work at the state government level, all 50 states. And I have an operation, as you can see in the slides, I have an operation in all 50 state capitals and in Washington, D.C. I'll actually be going to Washington, D.C. tomorrow as part of one of our advocacy visits, and meeting with governors, meeting with senators, meeting with the president and his team is part of what we do, because our goal is to educate them about actions that they can take in order to help improve the burden of cancer. So let's talk about what some of that is. So we had a bunch of wins earlier in this last year and at the end of earlier this year and at the end of last year. Example, in the United States, up until January of this year, if you tested positive at home for colorectal cancer risk through at-home testing like FIT testing or colonoscopy, then the next thing that was important for you to do is to have a colonoscopy. But if you tested positive at home, now your colonoscopy was no longer free of charge. You had to pay out of pocket for that, because now it's not screening anymore. You already tested positive at home. So now it's diagnostic. And so that barrier was real. So people actually weren't following through in their colonoscopy. So this is when we were able to work with the federal government, give them these information about the importance of the follow-on colonoscopy and about the lack of uptake because of this financial barrier. And we were able to work with the federal government to eliminate that payment that was required for colonoscopy. So that started in January 1st of this year. And we can't help but to think that we are saving lives through this strategy, because we've already started to see that the uptake of that follow-on colonoscopy is higher. So really important win for us there. And there are other wins that are absolutely key, but at the state level, here's an example of that. So we all know we are in the age of precision oncology. If you think about EGFR mutations for lung cancer, if you think about the importance of BRCA2 status for whether or not someone can get a PARP inhibitor, it's critical that biomarker testing is done for cancers in which there's a companion diagnostic, or for which the treatment strategy that's standard of care requires or recommends biomarker testing. However, it wasn't happening. And those kinds of decisions are often made at the state level. And so we got to work. So last year we began in Illinois, and we're able to work with those elected officials to educate them, working with the community health systems, working with the patients, working with volunteers who live in that state, who vote in that state, to lift up their voices and tell the story about why biomarker testing is so important, and to have that be covered so that people aren't paying out of pocket. Many people are actually even just not asked to have biomarker testing done when they're trying to match to therapy. So we were successful in Illinois, and since that time have been successful in 14 more states. We had a little bit of a problem in California, where the governor initially vetoed the biomarker bill. And then we went back, and for those of you who are in the United States, and we re-educated Governor Newsom in California. And I'm very proud to say that he, over just a few weeks ago, signed the biomarker legislation into law. We are now waiting for Governor Hochul in New York to sign this. This passed through both her House and Senate. And so we are at this moment I would invite you to go on social media and join our voices, but we're asking the governor on social media and other ways to make sure she signs this vitally important bill. Again, the kind of thing that in one day we can affect thousands of lives by taking a science story, by taking a patient story, and educating elected officials about the importance of a bill that they need to sign or not. A really exciting last advocacy example that I want to give to you has to do with patient navigation. So we know in the United States that it is very challenging, even if you know healthcare, to navigate what happens after a cancer diagnosis. The patient hears you have cancer, and okay, here's what's next: labs, imaging, surgery, medical oncology, radiation oncology. Maybe you need a multidisciplinary clinic, and then we're going to do some labs again. It's a Byzantine, difficult process to navigate. So patients who have something called a patient navigator, who helps them quite literally navigate the journey, helps them in understanding, helps them in creating the appointments, helps make sure that when they come to their appointments, they have all of the imaging and all of the information that they need, that those patients do better. Patients who are navigated understand their care. They are more likely to complete their care as planned. They are less likely to land in the emergency department, where cancer care is, not well executed. It's, by definition, emergency care. It's also very expensive care. So the health systems actually end up having to pay more for the cancer care of that patient. And so it's an overall lower cost of care if someone is navigated. So patient navigation is one of those things, and I saw this myself, as a healthcare executive, is when all boats rise. Everyone wins when there's patient navigation. However, it was not a reimbursable component of the cancer care system. So there was no way to pay a patient navigator. So after collecting, again, all of the data, after funding patient navigators ourselves and collecting that information, and then taking the voices of oncologists and the voices of patients and voices of social workers, and creating a strategy to work again with the federal government, and in this case, certainly President Biden's White House, to talk about the importance of patient navigation. We were delighted when I got the call in August that this is going to be recommended to be a reimbursable component of cancer care starting in January in the United States, January 2024. So we were really delighted. We already ran something called the Navigation Roundtable, which is taking together multiple organizations who really care about patient navigation and creating best practices. And so we were able to move that forward, and we will be training and credentialing navigators. Now, what's this step by the White House and the federal government will cover lay navigators, so not clinical navigators. Clinical navigators has to be next on our list of priorities, but we'll take lay navigation for right now, because lay navigators, so non-professional or non-clinical navigators, can make a world of difference and be exceptional. We want to make sure that they're trained to a high level, and that these navigators, for example, are able to discuss things like clinical trials and understanding clinical trials and what they are and what to ask, and biomarkers, making sure that they understand all of this and can help communicate back and forth with the clinical team is really key. So we'll be training those navigators through a certification program called Lion that we're going to be opening up in January. So really, really, really excited about what this means for cancer patients in the U.S. So I hope I've given you some examples of how it is that these discoveries, if we're going to say, okay, we can match you to therapy and you need a biomarker to get it done, it's key for us to have hand in hand with that advocacy to make sure that people have access to that breakthrough. But the most visible way that we make sure people have access to breakthroughs and don't fall through the cracks of these things that drive cancer disparities is through what our patient support program. I'm very proud of the incredible people on my American Cancer Society team who work in this unit. We work in 5,000 communities across the country, and we focus on what's on the left: prevention and screening programs, running them with health systems, especially medically underserved areas of the United States, where these health systems could use help in understanding how to get people into prevention and how to get people into screening and early detection. But we also ourselves provide lodging, provide transportation, provide patient navigation, as I mentioned before, work with programs on survivorship, and educate. Just this part of the American Cancer Society touches 55 million unique lives every year. And this includes things like cancer.org. Now, remember, we're not a health system. We don't give cancer care. We have no financial or vested interest on where anyone gets their care. That's very different in the United States than I know some areas and parts of the world where that doesn't exist. But in the United States, there's competition amongst health systems. We're not in that. So we're the neutral party where people can come for just unbiased information about care. So just this part of ACS, between our website, downloadable information, our 24/7 call lines, and our online chat, just this part of the American Cancer Society gets 50 million unique users every year. So we keep it up to date and, again, give information of everything from prevention to screening to treatment to survivorship. Also important for patient support and a huge investment for us is the Hope Lodges. So Hope Lodges are incredibly special places. Unfortunately, we only have 32. I'm trying to grow these, but these are places for cancer patients and caregivers to stay close to cancer centers to get care. And we never charge anyone a dime. Some people stay more than 200 days. We have special units for patients undergoing CAR T-cell therapy or bone marrow transplant. But the most important parts of the Hope Lodges is that it really is truly just for cancer patients and caregivers. So it gives them an opportunity, every day to connect with each other. They become like any other family where the magic is happening in the kitchen at night, where someone's just come home from their first day of sitting in an infusion chair, and another individual is just coming off 5 weeks on that same regimen and says, you know what, here's what it's going to be like. Here's how I survived. Or their caregivers are connecting with each other. In these lodges, we also give information about biomarkers, about clinical trials, so that we're empowering cancer patients and their families to ask the right questions and be their best health advocate. Again, very aligned to your goal as an organization. So this is where our Hope Lodges are. As you can see, there's this big skew on the eastern side of the United States. We're trying to fix that. That's a remnant of the fact that the American Cancer Society used to be 12 separate organizations, and some of them valued the Hope Lodge more highly than others. And so I value them very highly. And so we are looking to see where the next ones will be. And the next Hope Lodge will actually be in southern Texas, very close to the border with Mexico. There's a deep need for us to have cancer lodging there. Now, rides are, as I mentioned, are really a big one. So, it is the case that every year, this is so important for us. We've supported more than 27,000 cancer patients back and forth to care. That number is actually missing a zero in the bottom. more about 400,000 rides per year that they're going to be given back and forth to care. And such an important thing. And here again, we try to match people based on what it is that their experience has been. So if we have someone who's a pancreatic cancer patient who needs a ride to care, we try to match them with someone who's either a survivor or who has cared for a loved one who has had pancreatic cancer, so that they can start to share experiences during the ride. It's for the mental health of all involved, including those giving the ride. It's a really important function. And because caregivers are one of our two key stakeholders, we think about this as well. We actually fund grants to try to understand how to improve the ability of caregivers to not just excel in their role as a caregiver to help someone through the cancer journey, but also to make sure that they're taking care of themselves and are able to really be there for that person. So we have materials that are specific to caregivers. We actually have an app that that is functioning for this as well. And we are putting these together, including videos, more than 200,000 videos in various languages for people to download so that they can get information about how they can best help someone through a cancer journey. Now, patient navigation is, of course, our way of funding this as well, but this time at the clinical level. So whereas the federal government is about to start to reimburse for lay navigation, and we talked about that, we very much feel like an accompaniment to that must be clinical navigation. And so right now we have 20 different health systems across the country where we're funding patient navigators for 3 years. Again, looking at outcomes and then having them share experiences so that we can develop the best practices of what works so that it can be emulated, and what didn't work so that we won't replicate those in other places. So a very important grant mechanism that's still going on. So at the end of the day, this is kind of how I think about ACS, and I'll kind of sum up here and then go into a couple of priorities that we're focusing on at the moment, just by way of example of some things you might not know about. So the way I think about ACS is all the decisions that we make and our priorities have to be centered on the patient and their family or their caregiver. And the way that we affect change in these 200 diseases that are cancer is that we must continue to identify cancer breakthroughs. And that's the Cancer Discovery Unit, laying out the problems and solving the problems through cancer science. But then getting access to those breakthroughs through advocacy and through directly supporting patients and making sure that they don't fall through the cracks that lead to cancer disparities. And this is the math I think we use toward ending the 200 diseases that we call cancer as we know it. And so I just want to end by just spending a couple of minutes on some things that are priorities, just to give you an example about how we translate the data into action. And so one of our priorities for 2023 going into 2024 is prostate cancer, and that's baked into the following data. So the one thing that we know about prostate cancer is it is the #1 diagnosed malignancy of men in the United States. In 2023, it will account for almost 1/3 of all cancer diagnoses in men. This is not a small problem. And the economic burden to the United States is also a problem. It's $3.3 billion a year of productivity lost because of prostate cancer. So this is a lot. Almost 300,000 men will hear you have prostate cancer this year alone. It's a large problem, sort of, because we know that early stage prostate cancer has a very high expectation of cure, either through radiation therapy or chemotherapy. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening. So if we look at relative survival rate for prostate cancer, and this has been true the entirety of my career, localized or locally advanced prostate cancer has this exceptionally high cure rate. But we have no durable cure for anyone with distant disease or with advanced disease. It drops down to 31% at 5 years. The 10-year survival rate is single digit. So this is an issue. So on the one hand, we have a cancer that we know is highly curable, yet the challenge is it's the second leading cause of cancer death in the United States. So you can really only come to one conclusion here. There's a curable cancer that we're not curing because we're not catching it early enough. So this year alone, we'll have about 35,000 men that will needlessly die of prostate cancer because their cancers were detected when it was unable to be cured. So how do we handle that? It's already a challenge. But then when we look at trends, and this is what I mean by looking at trends and then finding issues that we really must raise awareness about and deal with. So if we look at our most recent report, what we see is a 3% year-over-year increase in prostate cancer across the board for all men. But really strikingly and disheartening is this 5% year-over-year increase of advanced diagnosis, meaning that we're shifting away from a diagnosis at early stage disease and increasing this number of men. There's this percentage of men who are diagnosed with more advanced disease, which we know we can't cure. So this is really a problem. So we've got to do something about this. And so I dug in with my science team. We published a paper at the end of last year, really comprehensive papers for all the GU cancers, looking at disparities, geographic and ethnic, for all the GU cancers. But the largest cancer disparity that exists in the United States actually is Black men with prostate cancer. So these are really heartbreaking data. So the evidence tells us prior to COVID that Black men and white men are screened for prostate cancer at approximately the same rate. It's a low rate. It's a poor rate. It's about 33% of eligible men get screened, but they are screened at approximately the same rate. Yet Black men have a 70% increased incidence of prostate cancer compared to their white counterparts. Why? We actually don't know. We don't know enough about prostate cancer risk overall, and we certainly don't know what accounts for this increased prevalence in Black men. Further, and this is a big challenge, we know that Black men are 2 to 4-fold more likely to die of prostate cancer than any other demographic. And we don't understand that. We don't understand what contribution may or may not be biologic, but we certainly do know that access to quality cancer care is factoring and looming large in that cancer disparity. So a la what it is that we can understand and then use our 3 arms to do something about. We also know that disparities are profound from a geography standpoint. So I'll call your attention to the following. This is just for white men. So now let's take race and ethnicity out of the equation and just look what's happening with white men across the country. And for example, if we look at, and these are incidence rates on the left and mortality rates on the right. So let's just, for example, look at California, all the way there on the western side of the US. They have some of the lowest incidence rates of prostate cancer in the country and the highest mortality rate. What does that mean? So we can generate hypotheses here to be tested. We can discuss this with through science discovery. We can discuss this with elected officials and have them lean in with us to ensure that cancer screening is implemented in their state. But we can also work directly with patients and communities to call out these kinds of geographic disparities. And I'm just picking on California, but as you can see, the trends for mortality on the western side of the United States are relatively striking compared to what happens in the rest of the US. And we don't understand yet the reasons why. So what are we doing right now? We have 42 active grants to help solve for the problem of prostate cancer. Our investment in this area is about $40 million at present. And we are also working with other organizations. We recognize we can't do this alone. So we are working with a number of different cancer organizations to raise awareness about the importance of prostate cancer screening. We are also in the process of revising our prostate cancer guidelines. That's a 3-year study. So it takes us a little while to get there. And that has to be part of our strategy to end prostate cancer as we know it for everyone. So that's an example of how we take the data and move it forward, and then leverage research, advocacy, and patient support to get something done. And so finally, I want to end on just telling you something that you might not know about the American Cancer Society that's an exciting way for us to ensure that good ideas do not end on the laboratory or the clinic floor. So I mentioned before that we are the largest funder of cancer research outside the US government. Again, since 1991, investing $3.3 billion in cancer research. And yet, I think we all know, and I think we've talked to or maybe even been one of these people, that exciting science reaches a certain point when at that moment it needs to be translated into the clinic and or a new phase 1 agent or new targeted agent developed. But there's lack of infrastructure for someone to be able to take it into that translational step, or lack of support at a medical school or an institution to be able to form a startup company in order to get something done. So translational ideas die. So we have something, and this is the kind of the translational continuum that I know you're familiar with. We developed something at the American Cancer Society called Bright Edge, and Bright Edge is meant to catalyze these transitions and ensure that good ideas have an opportunity to be tested. And we do this through an ability to invest early stage in innovative ideas and startups. So the idea is to accelerate and fast track discoveries into real term, next term, near term patient benefit. So here's an example of how Bright Edge works. So we all know that immunotherapy, immuno-oncology has become really a revolutionary new strategy for cancer treatment, taking its rightful place next to surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation therapy as ways that we treat cancer. Yet, immunotherapy has been successful only in a small handful of indications across all different cancer types. Well, we had funded a postdoctoral fellow. Postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Matthewson, had a really good idea for how to develop T-cell therapy against glioblastoma, which we know is a high priority cancer with a high mortality rate that we need to do more about. High risk, high gain science. So the science that was coming out of this postdoctoral fellow and his mentor was so strong that the mentor decided to create his own startup company called Immunitas. Now, I am not endorsing Immunitas. I'm giving this as an example of how we want to get behind something that has an opportunity to be a really good thing. We looked at those data. Immunitas asked us to invest in their company, and we did. Now, we're a charity. We can't give very much money to invest, but we can look at the science, we can look at the investment, and determine whether or not we think if the product or service was going to be successful, would it improve a life? This went past that gate. So we did invest. And this is where the American Cancer Society name actually is meaningful to subsequent investors at a time when it's very difficult to get support and startup funds for a scientific program and an idea, especially as related to a therapy. So we invested in through Bright Edge, which is our investment arm, through to Immunitas, and it's meeting its goal right now. Immunitas has moved into the clinical trial setting, and that's meeting our goal of patients are having access to this breakthrough in the form of clinical trial. I hope that it works, and if it does, lives will be improved. It's also the case that if it works and this generates revenue for the American Cancer Society, then we have more dollars that we can put back into their cancer research program. And so that's one of the things that we're thinking about. But not all of the things that we invest in, these good ideas that we invest in, happen to be treatment strategies. That's not what we want to do. We'd like to fund across all of the things that can touch cancer and improve lives. Example. One of the things we talked about was financial toxicity and the large number of patients. I mentioned this the statistic before that 42% of individuals deplete their life savings in the US when they have a cancer diagnosis. It's because of all these out-of-pocket costs. And sometimes there are ways to offset those costs. It's just hard for people to determine what they are and to access these offsetting programs. And so there was a company, we invest in navigators. Part of what navigators do is help with this. But we were also approached by a company called TaylorMed, and they're a financial navigation platform that are meant to use artificial intelligence and other strategies, technologies to look at what the cancer patient may face, anticipate, and then apply for ways to offset the financial toxicity of their care. And so we invested in TaylorMed actually twice because we saw progress and we wanted them to push even farther. But TaylorMed's activities are now being tried out through a trial form in more than 1,000 different hospital sites across the country, and are starting to show real reward and an ability to offset financial toxicity. And I know some of you might be thinking, oh, financial toxicity, that's not really a toxicity. Actually, recent data funded by the American Cancer Society and others have told us it absolutely is a toxicity. So someone who is experiencing a financial difficulty as related to cancer has often a poor outcome as compared to someone who does not, and also faces other health-related issues as a result of financial toxicity, including depression, immunosuppression, and others. So financial toxicity really is not a misnomer. It truly is something that's real in the United States. So across the cancer continuum, we've funded a large number of startup companies. Again, so, it's a drop in the ocean what we can give. We can't give very much, but they are meaningful dollars to us and to our donors and to those who want to work with us to help ensure that we're improving lives every day. And so we're very excited to get behind these innovative ideas, to fund even more innovative science and startups through Bright Edge, and are enthusiastic about having more opportunities to look at as the years go on. So I hope I've given you a good overview of what it is that we do at the American Cancer Society. I view us as a great enabler of cancer discovery, and as you heard, an enabler of ensuring that these discoveries get to patients in a way that complements things that are happening in outside health systems, cancer centers, and the U.S. government. It's an ecosystem, and we're all going to have to work together if we really are going to end cancer as we know it for everyone. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm very happy to answer a question on any aspect of what I've touched on. And again, just want to thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Honestly, that was a very, very interesting presentation because I got to learn not just about your organization, but the ways we can further help to commit to this cause as well. So thank you so much for that, first of all.
My pleasure.
So to continue on with today, we'll now be passing the mic on to our moderator, Emmett, for the Discussions with Global Leaders session.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Thank you so much, Dr. Knudsen, for the wonderful presentation. I could not be more grateful and honored to be here, present for that. We honestly are so grateful that you took time out of your day to give us such a wonderful, insightful presentation. Now, moving on to the next session and our next part of our whole session. Thank you and welcome to the Discussions with Global Leaders. I am Ahmed Hashim, and I will be your moderator for today. We're excited to be speaking with Dr. Knudsen, who is an expert in cancer advocacy and research. We do have a lot of questions. We've received a lot of questions, and we're going to do our best to get through all of them in that time that we have with you. For the first question, I'm going to be passing the mic back to our host, Mallory.
Thank you so much, Emmett. So for the first question, Doctor, as part of the younger generation where we heavily use media's influence, have you observed any kind of instances where the coverage is positively or negatively impacted the public understanding of cancer itself, and what is something that we can do to make it better, as well as with the help of ACS's news and information as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think your question really centers on communication. And, for us, it's constantly a challenge because right now in the United States, of course, the majority of people who are diagnosed with cancer are not digital natives, right? Because cancer largely is a disease of aging. So, we even have problems we recognize if we're just taking an app, for example, to help someone or even to help a caregiver, and it's only on a mobile phone. It's a challenge, because that's not the way a 65-year-old or a 75-year-old necessarily communicates. But their caregiver might, if the caregiver is a grandson or a granddaughter. And so we really have to be omni-channel. It's challenging for us because the cost accelerates when we need to be omni-channel on everything. But we do try. I think we can do a better job of ensuring that we are using every channel. But one of the things that we have absolutely increased over the last 5 years, or 3 years rather, is our use of social media and social media strategy. It's one that's consistently under refinement. I would certainly benefit from feedback from you and your constituents about things that you think we can do better. But we've both tried to lift up awareness, but also combat misinformation. We just had to do segments on TikTok to battle during Breast Cancer Awareness Month some pretty significant and I would say profound misinformation about breast cancer that was circulating through through TikTok. And so it's a cautionary tale for us about the fact that we can't just rely on the fact that the good message is going to be the one that rises to the top. Good meaning valid.
No, definitely, Doctor. I completely agree. And I hope that we can also be a part of helping this, not just through the media disciplines, but also by word of mouth and so much more as well.
Without question.
Back to you, Emmett.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that wonderful, insightful answer. It was a beautiful question, Madhuri. I'm so glad I was here for it. So moving on to my question, Doctor. So I'd like to ask, what's the latest improvement in the treatment approaches that are available for relapsed T-cell lymphomas? And do you think there's a future in something innovative that we have while approaching certain treatments?
Yeah, well, I wish I had a great answer for you on, relapsed T-cell lymphoma. It's certainly an area, of active research, but one in which I think we're going to see some formidable gains. The heme malignancies always seem to be well ahead of us in terms of ability to track tumor evolution and as well assess the impact of novel agents as compared to solid tumors, which is, more my area of specialty. But it is the case that, this is where cancer science really has to play a major role, and access to clinical trials. One of the things I didn't get to mention in my talk is that here in the United States, there's a large disparity between adults and pediatric cancer patients about access to clinical trials. Every year here in the United States, as I talked about, there are 1.9 million new cancer diagnoses. Of those, thankfully, quite rare, are pediatric cancers, only about 10,000. Now, 85% of pediatric cancers in the United States go on clinical trial because they are largely clustered for care at high-performing centers that have clinical trials as part of their overall strategy for battling these relatively rare cancers that are pediatric. That's in stark contrast to the situation with adult cancer patients. So for adult cancer patients, less than 5% in the United States go on clinical trial. And studies have shown that people want to go on clinical trial when asked and when people have had time to explain to them about the importance of clinical trial. But too few people are being asked. And the financial, that's problem one. Problem two is that in the community setting, there's often not the resources at community oncology centers where the vast majority of cancer patients are diagnosed and treated. There are often not the resources to set up a clinical trial activity, everything from, from the regulatory to the actual conduct of the trial, or even just the way the cancer center is configured is prohibitive from the clinical trial going on. So we have a lot that we need to solve here in the United States for greater access to clinical trials.
No, definitely, Doctor. That definitely makes sense. And I think there's obviously a difference between those two as well. And I think that's something we'll have to further address as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that wonderful answer. I know it might have been a bit of the question, but thank you so much for the wonderful information you've shared with us. I'd like to pass on the mic for the next question to Dr. Yan.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Dr. Knudsen, for making time to speak on our amazing platform. As a physician, a former patient, and a caregiver, I have been for the longest time enamored with your organization. And we're so honored to have an amazing leader like you at the helm. Now, you spoke about many initiatives of the American Cancer Society. A lot of achievement has been achieved under your great leadership over the past 2 or so years. Over the next 5 to 10 years, or even longer during your tenure there, what are you most excited about? What, and in terms of what initiative either you're currently instigating or one that you're hoping to instigate into existence? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So maybe I can take it on each kind of in the pillars, right? So on the advocacy side, I am very excited about the patient navigation win, and I am thrilled that it is happening so that there will be greater access to patient navigators. In my opinion, again, from having led oncology in this large health system, it is arguably one of the most important things that we can do to level the playing field. Again, because patients who are navigated generally have access to advanced care, get discussions about clinical trials, complete their CARES plan, and have every opportunity to be supported in a way that allows them to maximize their survival chances. So I love that. But it's not going to only happen with lay navigators. So I'm very excited about pushing this to becoming clinical navigators. Another major advocacy focus that we need to work on is on palliative care. So pain management, palliative care, it's been very difficult in the United States to have that become a reimbursable component of cancer care, because somehow it's gotten confused at some elected officials' minds that palliative care is the same as hospice or is the same as end-of-life care, and that this is going to be placing in the wrong hands life and death decisions, the death panel concern that people have. And that we've got to battle that misinformation and make sure that palliative care becomes something that's a discussion, and that goals of care meetings happen at the beginning of a cancer journey, not at the end when someone is experiencing significant bone pain or other distress based on cancer, and they don't know the words, they don't know how to get to that conversation about palliative care because the clinical teams don't have a way to bring it to them. So that's on the advocacy side. I would say that pushing on navigation and palliative care are two of our big ones. When it comes to patient support, we talked about a lot of the ways that we keep people from falling through the cracks. But one of the things I'd really like us to do is to build on success and focus on the cancers we know we can eliminate. And I think it will be a major win for us in this next 5 years if we are able to significantly enhance uptake of HPV vaccination. We know that up to 6 different cancers are driven by HPV. 99% of cervical cancers are driven by HPV. And I don't know one parent who wants their children to ultimately suffer from an HPV-driven cancer as an adult because they weren't vaccinated as children. And so I think we can build on success. This year in January, when we released our cancer statistics report, we saw something amazing. I mean, it was expected, but it was really great to see the data, which is in the cervical cancer report, when we looked at that disease incidence rate, we saw this precipitous 65% decline in cervical cancer incidence, specific to women 20 to 24, because they are the first generation to receive HPV vaccination. So I am very gratified by that. To me, that's the first real world evidence that HPV vaccination is going to help us end HPV-driven cancers, but we must get people into the right vaccination strategy. I can't tell you the number of times that I'm on an airplane or in a meeting or meeting someone at an event who's brilliant, maybe the captain of industry, but has no idea that boys should be vaccinated for HPV. And it's, as I call the forehead slap moment of, how is this still happening in 2023? So, I'm very excited about what's the possible just by taking the great things we've got right now and putting it into play. And then finally on the, on the discovery side, wow, we are in this explosive phase. Theranostics, radioligands, using artificial intelligence in order for us to interpret images and interpret changes in imaging over time to detect cancers earlier. Multi-cancer early detection tests. Are we going to finally be able, through liquid biopsy, to screen the unscreenable? And then, what did mRNA vaccine technology tell us during COVID? That there may be a way for us to rapidly scale bespoke style vaccines for different cancer types as they evolve. And is that the new technology? So on the science side, I think we can take these they're not little actually, these advances that have significantly led to different kinds of scientific thinking with relation to cancer prevention and cancer treatment, and then accelerate that. So all of that's possible in these next 5 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all that you do. You truly are an inspiration to all of us. And we look forward to following the amazing initiatives that you are pioneering.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's really fantastic. It's just an honor to lead this organization and see the progress that's made possible through the science, through the advocacy teams, through the patient support teams, but also through partnership, with people like you throughout the country.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for that wonderful answer. For our next question, I'd like to move on to Sean, please.
Hi, thank you very much. That was an incredible talk. I love how you clarify your organization's focus on patients and their families. As a fourth-year medical student and aspiring oncologist myself, I'm currently actually working in a hem-onc clinic, and I was wondering personally, how would you recommend the use of the ACS's resources to best help patients and their caregivers when they are originally diagnosed? I've
Yeah.
seen Survivor Network, and I pointed patients there before. I think that's a wonderful forum. What other recommendations would you give me?
Yeah, that's fantastic. The Cancer Survivors Network that we run is it's a game changer. People want to talk to people who have walked in their shoes. It makes perfect sense. So what I would say for patients that are under your care that you're interacting with, I would encourage them to go to cancer.org. It truly has almost everything that they would need to know in order to be a well-informed patient or caregiver, so that they can frankly have a better conversation with you, to come in with their questions about clinical trials and biomarkers and side effects and things that they might ask. It's built specifically with them in mind, but also scalable, so that if they want to have more information because they're, maybe they have a high health literacy, or they just, have done some investigation on their own, to make sure that what they're seeing on Dr. Google is right, coming to cancer.org is really a very trusted source. The other component of that is the hotline and is the chat line. It's even my own employees, we had someone on our patient support team who was diagnosed with cancer, and she doesn't have a medical background herself. She kind of works out in the community, making sure that people know about screening and prevention, who was diagnosed with cancer and was, at 3 o'clock in the morning wrestling with how she was going to preserve her own fertility. So she went on our own chat line and started that discussion, and she became, a user herself overnight. I spoke to her recently, and it was just a game changer. It's incredible when you hear your own teammates going to the American Cancer Society, ourselves, in the middle of the night, as a patient, desperate to get information and feeling really gratified that there was somebody for them 24/7, 365.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful thing when you work for such a incredible organization that you can also benefit and reap the rewards of all your hard work. And cancer is unfortunately one of those ubiquitous things that can affect us all in our lifetimes in one way or another. So I appreciate your answer. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Doctor, again, for the wonderful answer. For our next question, I'd like to move on to Samia, please.
Yes. Hello, doctor. Thank you so much for your time and such a wonderful, wonderful presentation. My question for you is, for our more junior attendees just getting into research and medicine, what inspired you to pursue the field of oncology? And how has this choice impacted your life? And was it everything that you had initially anticipated?
Yeah, I love what I do. I think I have the best job that I never thought I would have. I loved oncology research. That's where I thought I would be my whole career. Because I got into science at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, when the underpinnings, the molecular understanding of cancer was starting to be unraveled. And I was lucky enough to be part of that and see a way to translate it. And so, I've been fortunate enough to be part of discoveries that did change practice, and still clinical trials going on based on some of my work, but I had to step away from those when I came to the American Cancer Society. But, I think that when you meet with patients and you meet with the families, and understanding that it literally affects every family in the country, you can't help but be emboldened to do more. And in those days when, there's this great discovery, this breakthrough, this clinical trial that was a total game changer, makes up for all of the days when it's really difficult and somebody didn't make it. And a patient that you absolutely loved and interacted with is really struggling. And I love what I do because I think that until we do end cancer as we know it for everyone, it's up to all of us to lean in, to be creative, to support each other, and to let the science continue to have continue to accelerate the breakthroughs and flatten that curve that we talked about earlier today.
Thank you so much for your answer, Doctor.
Thank you again, Doctor, for that very insightful answer. For our next question, I'd like to move on to Harshita.
Thank you, Doctor, for your time. I would like to know, you have achieved a tremendous career success. I would like to know how the importance of a strong support network helped along your journey.
That's a really great question. It means everything. And I think this support network for me is something that will always be important in my career. I think that I've really benefited from having people that I really trust, who are peers, people whom I really trust, who are mentors that I can still go to at this moment and get and use as a sounding board and ask, what would you do? So if, for example, I'm very close with Steve Klasko, who was my CEO when I was at Jefferson Health leading oncology. And he is just a brilliant, brilliant man. And I know if I called him right now and said, Steve, I am just struggling with this decision, or I'm struggling with not knowing how to handle this situation, that he'd say, okay, all right. He'd make time for me and say, let's talk it through. Like, what are your thoughts? What's ABC? Let's go through and look and think about what are your opportunities and what might be the best thing. And sometimes just the thinking out loud with him gives me the answer. But I try to think that I do that for my former trainees, for my current peers. And there's a lot of CEO to CEO support in the world where we do feel like we can call each other and ask questions. I think that makes it really important. I think it's hard to do any profession in a vacuum. And I feel very lucky that I do have people that I do trust, that I can bounce ideas off of. And I do that regularly. I'm never the person who thinks when I walk in a room that I'm the smartest one in it. So I always think I have something more to learn because I think that's true.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, everyone, that will unfortunately be our last question for the day. Dr. Knudsen, a huge, huge thank you again for taking your time out of your day and spending it with us today, giving us so much insightful information. Today was an amazing session with you, and we are also grateful and so happy that you're here with us today. Thank you for all the questions.